Good morning, everyone. How's it going? It's January, it's a quiet winter morning, so I thought I would switch gears a little bit and talk about the Belko Experiment from 2016. Written by James Gunn and directed by McLean, and that makes it the first time I've actually talked about a McLean movie on my channel, oddly enough. It seems weird because he is one of my favorite directors who's emerged in more recent years. But for one reason or another, I've just never gotten around to talking about any of his movies on the channel yet, so yay. While this is certainly not his best outing, nor is it James Gunn's best, I'll admit that up front, okay? Like, this is a pro job as far as horror movies go, but these guys have both definitely done better. But a lesser day at the office for James Gunn and McLean, respectively, is still probably a lot better than a good day at the office for many filmmakers. And this is a very lean, accessible, no-frills, 80-minute exploitation movie. It's nihilistic, maybe even to a fault. I mean, that's probably why some people don't like it, because really, when you come right down to it, it ends on a note that just basically says, like, yeah, there was no way that they were getting out of there no matter what. They were all going to die in that building. No official spoiler warning with this one. It's an older movie, and it was only kind of a modest hit in its day. So I figure anybody who's actually watching a review about the Belko Experiment at this point has probably already seen it anyway. With James Gunn's script being so cynically determined to make sure that everybody dies except for the lead character, Mike Milch, I can understand why it's off-putting, but at the same time, I also can appreciate that the way that it's structured, it is more like you're a fly on the wall, just kind of watching the experiment unfold. There's nothing about it that allows you to get truly invested in someone and hope and root for them to live. If there's anyone at all who is sort of a vague surrogate for the audience, it probably is the voice played by Greg Henry. That's not to say that Mike Milch isn't an interesting character, because there are hints at the beginning of the movie and then at certain points once the chaos ensues, where you get the suggestion that this guy does have some darker elements to his psyche. It does seem like there's a part of him that can't help but, walk right into trouble, like a quail when it sees a car coming down the road. Like, the quail's always got to just fly in front of your headlights right when you're pulling up. He's sort of the same way. I mean, he has, some good intentions, and he does seem to have a good heart, but he also just has this sort of darkly, I don't even know what to call it, just this weird sort of preoccupation with putting himself in danger. He's a bit of a masochist or something, I don't know. Perhaps even vaguely suicidal on some level. But in any case, that's never really fleshed out. It's just hinted at here and there, because once the experiment is underway, it's full speed ahead on the roller coaster, and there isn't a whole lot of time for any sort of character study or exposition at that point. But there is still intrigue, and I think that a big part of that has to be credited to the casting. James Gunn's script, while it does maintain the mean streak that he's kind of become known for, and does have some clever dialogue and harken back to some of the material that he wrote when he was working more closely with Troma, is ultimately rather first drafty in its construction and in its overall feeling. Polished enough to be serviceable, but quite first drafty nevertheless. I mean, this sort of feels like what happened with Kevin Williamson getting I Know What You Did Last Summer filmed, even though he had written it prior to Scream. At that point, people were clamoring to make whatever else he had lying around. He happened to have I Know What You Did Last Summer, and away you go. Or at least that's kind of my perception. I mean, please feel free to correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that. In essence, that's sort of what happened here. After Guardians of the Galaxy made James Gunn a household name kind of out of nowhere, people were hungry to make anything else that he had in his back pocket, and he happened to still have the Belko Experiment. $5 million, away you go. I know it sounds like I've gone off on a tangent, but all of this to say, with Tony Goldwyn, John C. McGinley, John Gallagher Jr., Michael Rooker, and several other recognizable TV character actors all cast in the squarely appropriate roles, they're all seasoned enough and bring enough weight, enough as character actors in of themselves, that they're able to fill out these characters much more than James Gunn's screenplay did. Say what you will about typecasting, but in situations like this, it is an asset. And it's a testament to all these actors that they are able to make these characters feel less like the stock types that they're written to be. I mean, John C. McGinley and Tony Goldwyn in particular, honestly, they're such good villains here that the movie almost doesn't deserve it. Tony Goldwyn makes Barry someone who seems like he isn't always actually sure if he's acting out of necessity. It's more like he's constantly trying to convince himself, along with everyone else, that he's actually acting out of necessity. The tortured way he plays that big execution scene down in the foyer is awesome. Every person he takes down, you can just feel how uncomfortable and sickened he is. Every gunshot you hear in that scene kind of keeps you on edge, primarily because he makes you feel it. John C. McGinley is, of course, one of the treasures of the character actor world. He wades into these crazy waters of carnage without any hesitation whatsoever. And he too does a good job of sketching out a guy who's got a bit of a history to him. Probably one of those overgrown sandbox bullies who only felt like he had any real purpose or sort of like heft to his life when he was in active duty in the military. And now that he's not, he pisses with anyone who's going to give him the time of day, and he'll jump on any excuse to exercise control over other people to try and, give himself a sense of purpose again. Plus, John C. McGinley just plays creepy so well and with so much relish that it's just infectious. I mean, you gotta love the guy. His character Wendell feels like the kind of character that would have been played by a younger Gary Busey or Dennis Hopper if this movie was made in the 80s or early 90s. Michael Rooker's able to make more out of his character Bud than you would expect for a movie like this too. Not to mention the fact that he's not in too much of it. As much as the grown-up in me knows and understands that he was only in that much of the movie because they could probably only afford to have him for like a day or two, it is still pretty bold to take a recognizable star like that and kill him off so early on, particularly when he's playing a character who's very competent, very brave, very sincere, feels very decent, feels like the kind of person who would be a protagonist in most movies. And when he bites it early, when he's, I think, actually the first person to be killed, or killed by another person, I should say, it kind of takes you aback a little bit. Sean Gunn's character comparatively does feel a little bit more stock and cartoonish, and some of the dated stoner humor that's written for his character does kind of betray the fact that James Gunn wrote this a long time before it was actually filmed. But Sean Gunn is Sean Gunn. If you're going to turn someone into a wind-up toy, it might as well be this guy. More than once, he allows the screenplay to get away with murder by getting a laugh out of moments that should fall flat, but are somehow made humorous thanks to his natural comic timing and just animated sense of performance and delivery. For its budget range, this movie looks and sounds really good. Greg McLean has always had a talent for stretching the dollars to make some really stunning visuals, and that knack is still on display here. It's also interesting to see him working in confined spaces when so often we're used to his signature wide sweeping vistas of the Australian outback. McLean doesn't fuse horror and humor quite as well here as he did in Wolf Creek 2. This, for the most part, is a relatively serious affair. There's little hints of humor here and there, and I don't mind that. I don't mind understated humor. It's one of those things where there's not always comedy per se, but there's some little thing lurking around the frame that is just kind of a little bit of a lowbrow sight gag or something like that. Or that one point where after one round of carnage, it just kind of almost at random cuts to this shot outside a fence looking back at the compound, and in the center of the frame there's a dog taking a whiz. Something about that always gets me because it takes me a second to see the dog and then I just kind of smirk a little bit. The one part that does feel like a very Greg McLean signature set piece is the sequence when they're detonating a whole series of bombs in a row, and all the people who have cowered under the tables in the cafeteria, that's gonna help. Jeez, you goofs. But anyways, they're all crouched in fetal position under these tables, and as the bombs start going off, their heads hit the top of the table. All the cutlery and bowls and food just goes flying everywhere, and you've got Sean Gunn at the very front of the room just repeating over and over, "It's all in my mind, it's all in my mind, it's all in my mind." I would put that sequence on par with anything that he staged in Wolf Creek or Wolf Creek 2. It's just too bad, I suppose, that the movie didn't have more of that sense of zeal on the whole. And I like this movie. It's one of those movies that for me is sort of the horror film equivalent of comfort food. But given Greg McLean and James Gunn's track record, not to mention the fact that James Gunn mentioned in interviews promoting the movie that he had told the studio he would only make it if he was allowed to make it as extreme as he wanted to, it's hard not to feel like this is, well, I wouldn't go so far as calling it sort of like half-assed like some people have, but it does feel pretty meat and potatoes considering the horror pedigree behind it. It works efficiently and effectively as a kind of get in, get out grindhouse movie, and on a side note, the gore effects are very good. But I do also think that there are hints of potential for a whole franchise coming out of this, and it does end on a note that suggests a sequel. Obviously, that never happened. It probably works better in its final form as a one and done anyways, but it's merely a good job when it could have been a great job, especially with what the cast is bringing to it. And I don't know how much I can even really fault Greg McLean either, because looking at it, even though it doesn't sort of have some of the flourishes that make me enjoy some of his other movies more, he's essentially just filming this script as it's written, as nearly as I can tell. I appreciate that James Gunn shelved this one for a while and almost kind of forgot about it, but nevertheless, like, I think that he really could have stood to refine the script a little bit more. His screenplay does its job, but if he had beefed it up a little bit to meet the level of the performance of his cast here, it would have really been something cool. The fact that James Gunn's stroke allowed him to get a movie like this into theaters was in and of itself cool, but it's just too bad that they didn't capitalize on the opportunity a little bit more. I am very glad that it got a theatrical release, because without one, this is probably the kind of movie that would have just sort of, died a very mute death being released on the Sci-Fi Channel or something like that. I think that's about all I have to say for this one. It is available to watch free on TUBI. I have a feeling it's going to be getting real cozy on the TUBI couch. Thanks for watching, guys. Look for more content coming soon, and have yourselves an awesome day.